We had the opportunity to spend quite a bit of time with those folks and working through some of the details. Tonight you'll hear a report about what that is and what our findings are and where they came in at in terms of probable costs. We have a letter there for you to read to discuss what that letter entails. And then I'd like to also, just before we get started, remind the board, remind the public that even though it did take several weeks to do that work, it did not come at any cost to the district. We didn't pay the JTS, we didn't pay consultants. They did the work, they investigated the process, so we didn't spend one dime on that process. So I'd like to call Mr. Kristofi and have him go through his presentation, if you would, please.
Thanks, Dr. Wood. Tonight, I'd like to present some of the challenges and the lessons learned regarding this project and how we take those lessons and apply them to a new recommendation. But before I do that, I want to just basically recap the JTS proposal. If you recall, back in April, we had JTS Construction at the board meeting where they indicated that they could meet the budget of $10.6 million for the hard construction costs. 2 weeks later, and just to remind everyone, it was for this site plan, for the work scope on this site plan, the administration building, building C, building E, F, G, and the kitchen reload. We came back 2 weeks later, and unfortunately, there were $3 million over the budget, which brought us basically back to the original bid of 13.5. And it was very disappointing, to say the least, because I was very hopeful that we were going to have a project, but they quoted the site work and the soils export as the primary factor in that.
Let me elaborate a little bit. And as Gary and I tag team this presentation, understand that as we discussed with them, even after this event, obviously we had multiple discussions after they even submitted this letter and outlining their conditions and costs to include possible ways to eliminate as much as possible in that drainage basin at the south end, if you will, there you go, of this plan. And I think we've been able to do that, but let's say, for example, that is $1.2 million of export. And let's say that we could balance the site where we would eliminate the export. Their cost was, and I'm using rough numbers, please understand, it was about $13.8 million. Well, we had, let's say, for example, 10.6, 10.7, at the most, $11 million to spend. Even if they were to save the entire amount of 1.2, they would still be far in excess of our capacity to build this project. Still in excess of $1 million plus, $1.5 million above our budget. So again, we do have some additional recommendations. We do have some additional items we'll discuss on the drainage basin, but that's unfortunate. I obviously am extremely disappointed in JTS and their inability and their overestimation of their ability to deliver on a project. To include, as you go through here, and give a good example, the 30% didn't even apply to the modular buildings themselves. So they were the same price, if not slightly more, and in excess of $300,000 more than our lowest bid on a design bid building. So obviously problematic, but again, if you'll remember, I wanted to go back and remind the board and the public, even though it took them a good amount of time, we didn't spend any money on them.
Could you just, I'm sorry, I'm probably looking, I just want to catch up with you in terms of looking at the right documents.
Okay.
This document that you handed out that has the numbers on it on the second page?
Option 4 relates to this plan here. I kept the same labeling from the last presentation so that we know.
Is that the same as the numbers that would be in this letter?
Yes.
JTS?
Yeah, when you look at that number, it matches the hard costs.
That's really hard to see on this one. This one,
Oh, I got you.
It's 13.8.
The 13,855.
Yeah.
That's the hard cost. When you look at the soft costs and the hard costs, that's the bottom line number, and we're still $3 million over the budget, which is 12.73.
see, keep in mind, everybody says, well, you're close, you're 13 million. We don't have 13 million to spend. We have 11 million to spend, at best. More like 10.6, 10.7, depending upon the soft costs. So as you go down through here, you can see the soft costs are itemized and probable costs associated and earmarked for each of those items. You still have to have an IOR, or an inspector of record. You still have cultural, biologists, all of the special inspections, the project, you know, on, and legal fees and utilities, and there's other costs associated other than construction, and they're itemized in the soft cost to include contingencies.
Yeah.
What, 3%?
Yeah, it's 3%, which typically is kind of low. We like to be in the 4 or 5% range.
And keep in
There's
mind,
also-
over the last several weeks, in addition, I want to point out, and again, commend the community members that we spent an inordinate amount of time with, to be honest with you, several different community members, in working through the export issue on the drainage basin. And again, they asked me not to mention their names, so I will not do that. But we worked with at least 4 different contractors. Mr. DeStassa was part of some of those meetings. Again, thank you, Mark, for showing up to those meetings. And we had several discussions, I mean, real rich, deep, detailed discussions as it relates to the retention basin, drainage basin, if you will, and about ways we can mitigate the expense of 1.2. But at this venture, on this project, in that fashion, again, I want to get to that point when he talks about our last recommendation of where we go from here. But understand that the intention here is that if you look at that option 4 lease-back process and what that in dollar value is, it's in excess of obviously our capacity. It's 15.7 is the grand total. There's, you know, including soft costs. Their hard costs were 13.8, and our soft costs comes out to 15.7. So you can see again, we just don't have the capacity to deliver a project that's 15,700,000.
So if you can go to the next slide, please.
Yeah, this
Just-
was really hard to see on that. We do have, I don't know. if you
I've
have
given
any-
handouts to
You do
everyone.
have extras? Okay.
And just to reiterate, these numbers are taken verbatim from their letter. I don't want to get into any legalities by misrepresenting them, but it's basically 13.517 is the hard cost, and the hard cost and soft cost is $15,726,000. And the available overall budget is 12.73, so we're $3 million over. It's basically back to the original bid of February, which was in the same range.
But understand that, I think, for me, this process was invaluable. We got to see some, you know, in my opinion, some good construction. We learned a lot about the project. We learned a lot. They went through it with a fine-tooth comb again, talking about, you know, what's in it, what isn't in it, what's missed, what's there, what's not there. I'm talking about JTS, and that's all itemized in their document, in their letter to us, itemizing what's there, what's missing, and ways that we can mitigate some of the costs. I don't know that in all due respect to them, I'm not sure I'm on the same page with them, because if you look at some of their cost-cutting suggestions, it ends up where you really don't have much of a school left. So you can cut $3 million out of it, but it easily compromises the integrity of the project in order to get to where we need to be. So that's the first thing, and I think what we wanted to do tonight is discuss this project, discuss the fact that our due diligence on this project was to make sure that, number one, we could either afford it, or number two, we couldn't, and why, and what the outline of the project value was. And again, reiterate the fact that we didn't spend any money in doing so. We simply spent time and investigation of whether or not we could actually do what we said we're going to do. So, if we will, I'd like to, open it for the board for questions on JTS. in terms of their leaseback structure, and I know you may or may not have questions. Board?
You're asking for questions just specifically
Just
on...
specifically on the JTS proposal,
Okay.
on this particular, what we had talked about in terms of
Well, I guess
modular construction.
I haven't had the chance, I mean, I'm just getting this material now, so I know that we're all very disappointed. One of the things that really struck me about these guys when they were here is their experience in these similar situations and the confidence with which they addressed us in the project that they were going to look at. I know that, and again, I just read this, so I'm just skipping through it really quick. Interestingly, and maybe this speaks to the challenge we've had as a school board, for some reason, I was struck by this line. He said, this is the first time in 18 years I've worked at JTS that I've been unable to make a job work. So, you know, they've done dozens, I guess, or many of these schools. We know they've done these schools.
I've talked to many of the superintendents that they've done work
We
for.
did references.
Yes.
So I take them at their word. I mean, it seems like they came in feeling like, you know, they wouldn't have flown down here. They would have spent their own dime unless they felt like it was something they could make happen. So what is it that is so unique about our situation that causes this to keep happening to us? Is it?
It's the site work, it's the export.
Site work?
It's the site, it's the soil, it's the dirt export. And you're right, I mean, I checked their references, I talked to a number of architects that they worked with recently. They've done a tremendous job with other districts. They're currently working on a few campuses, full campuses. We went and visited their site, their manufacturing site, we visited campus, and we were very impressed. I mean,
Yeah, but Gary, let's get back to what I said. I don't know that, again, you and I haven't had this discussion in public, and I apologize, but I mean, if we talk a look at it, and I don't think it's entirely the site work. The reason being is, yes, that's a factor, but even if we were able to mitigate the entire $1.2 million of export,
Still don't hit the budget.
they still don't hit the budget. And the question is my concern was, even on the buildings, the actual construction of the building value did not
That's
meet
correct.
30%.
That's correct.
And that 1.2 million would have been something, would never, at no site, could
Exactly.
ever be zero.
Exactly.
At no site, it could be the most ideal site. I don't think we can summarize and kind of pigeonhole this whole problem into just a site location.
No, that's what I'm saying. I think we found ways to mitigate the 1.2,
Exactly.
and we're still in excess. You're looking at 15 million, so you take 1.2 and now you're 14.5.
Well, that's the other question I actually had, and I'm learning quite a bit about sort of public construction projects compared to sort of some of the things you might have experience with as a member of the community, building a home or something. So little of the budget is the actual buildings. So in this particular case, they came in at roughly $5 million, $4.9 million for the actual buildings. And, but the total amount, by the time you're done with everything, is 15 million, 15.7, right? So only 5 of 16 in this particular bid is the buildings. So what really, it's almost like the buildings couldn't have got cheap enough.
Well, yes and no, because keep in mind, obviously, as you take a look at, surveying, excavating, traffic control, and all the things that are listed in here, the concrete, for the concrete pouring, and the infrastructure, and the sewer, and the plumbing, and the
Well, I know,
electrical.
but that's my point. If it's $16 million, let's just subtract out the $5 million for the buildings. That leaves me with $11 million before I even get any buildings, regardless of whether they're stick-built or modular.
Well, remember, we have 11 million to spend, so if we were to spend 5 million, say, on the buildings, then yeah, so the rest of it is for site work, which includes not just grading, it includes all of the infrastructure.
Yeah, you're making my point, I think, which is, I guess I'm not trying to ask you to respond to anything. I'm kind of raising my eyebrows. I'm saying,
Yeah.
the buildings,
It would never be cheap enough.
the buildings could never be cheap enough.
But what do you, I guess for me, Matt, the frustration, again, you can hear it in my voice with JTS, is that I didn't even get 30% off the buildings. Compared
Even if
to
you got 30%
the
off the
previous
buildings.
bid. What's that? Even if I would have, you're right, I still wouldn't have made the dollar value.
I mean, $11 million just to move the dirt around, put some concrete down, and before you even get to put up a building,
But what you.
that would say in order for us to be in the budget, and help me, because I'm just trying to get my head around this. In order for us to be in budget, we'd have to spend $2 million on the buildings. Am I thinking about that right?
Yes.
Well, if it's
Yeah.
13A, and it'd be, yeah, you'd be very close, yes.
I mean, I just don't ever see us getting $2 million
No.
for any kind of building.
Now,
Your frustration, you're saying that when we switched from stick-built, custom construction to the prefabs, in order to save money, we ended up saving no money at all.
None,
That's correct.
None, so
not,
Why do-
I would understand, okay.
that was their whole presentation when I went up there
Exactly,
with you.
exactly.
That was, so,
And I don't know, I mean, they really, for
what
me.
they based it on, they only had a few days to look at it.
Yeah.
Well, but hold on a second.
No, they had many more days after the
After-
first meeting.
Yeah.
They had months, 2 months.
Is the concept that, so when I look at it, and again, when I look at it, I don't, whether 5 is the right number, or frankly, if they would have come in at 3
Yeah.
for the buildings, it still wouldn't solve our problem.
No.
So is the concept that we had when we asked JTS to go away, that they would help us bring some of these other costs down, like excavation and demolition, or site concrete and masonry?
Yes, well, the original cost was 10.6. They said we can bring everything within 10.6 million.
Including all these things.
Including the
Including
site.
all those, yes.
And then when they really looked into it, they said, no, we can't do it. It's just costing too much money.
10.6 versus the 13.8, not
Yeah.
including the salt.
Yeah,
So they were off themselves by 3.2 from their original estimate.
Yeah, when they
Remember
came
first
here.
came to the board,
yeah.
they had a couple weeks to take a look at it and came to the board and reported to you that they could be within budget.
Well, they're
which is-
probably not surprised. My guess is they've been doing this forever. I mean, I don't know if they broke down the numbers, but they probably weren't surprised by their own building costs by very much. So that must mean that their surprise came in things that weren't in their own building costs.
Yes,
Is that fair?
that's correct.
So
That's
you
what
say
the
they
letter
didn't save the
states.
money.
Well, they did come higher than what they stated in their buildings, but they were more surprised than the site work.
Yeah, so maybe they came at 5 and they used to be what, 4.5 or something? I mean, I can't imagine.
Yeah, I don't recall the
So
original.
where they got
number, but-
surprised, I guess what I'm trying to get to is where they got surprised is the same place we keep getting surprised, which is how hard it is to put anything in this area we've got. With the demo and excavation, the site concrete and the masonry, I'm just adding these things up. Is that,
I think that's accurate. I think, you're talking about a virgin piece of ground. That's not a good piece of ground. That has a lot of inherent flaws in terms of floodplains and different considerations and challenges in the actual piece of property.
Mark, where did we get that piece of ground? Did we trade that for
We did.
another location?
We traded it for another piece of the actual construction.
Did we trade for another piece of
No,
crap?
we had a site back in the 90s off of Wallace Canyon. More towards the Agua Dulce side off Sierra Highway. And it was deemed unsuitable for construction, primarily, as I understand it, because of the lack of water. So, and it was set back. So the board at the time, and we're talking Dead Sea Scrolls type time frame, decided that they didn't want that property. And so they went to an individual who owns a lot of property and business and what have you, and he had this piece off of Red Rover, and they swapped it out.
Mark, what I was talking about, if you remember like here,
Well,
There was a piece
No,
of
no,
truck.
no, but
the original.
It was a
correct.
triangular
Ed's
piece.
question was, how did we get to the Red Rover site?
Okay.
So that's how we got to the Red Rover site.
I thought you meant the triangle
No.
that we.
And then
Okay.
we understood,
Whole site.
look, in order to have a good comprehensive high school functional site, you gotta have about 40 acres. Okay? And we're in that ballpark, we're short, but we're in that ballpark.
Close.
The problem is that so much of it is not usable because of the plane. So, fast forward across time and come into more recent history, and we saw this site as not very good. And we ended up trying to resolve some of the issues and create more more operational space by trading land on this site. So we gave up some of the non-usable floodplain, Clearwater floodplain area with a residential developer in order to get a buildable piece of land closer to the freeway. And that's how we ended up with where we're at today. But none of what we did is really enough to ameliorate the issues with the site. And it's our site. It's the site we have. It's the site we own. The decision on it was cast long ago, and now we're just trying to make
Well,
the best.
I don't want to,
But I don't have a question on this, except to say that when the debacle of the bids came in, and we said, what are we going to do? And, oh, JTS, if you recall, I was yawning because I was talking about Back to the Future. We did this once before. What's the difference with modular? Why is it going to be different this time than it was 3 years ago when we looked at it?
Right.
Remember all that? So this, to me, is barely an alarm in my head. It's white noise. I didn't expect it was going to be anything other than what it is. And it's clear to me that without a state match and trying to build what we are trying to build in terms of that option E concept, we just don't have the money for it. And we have to look at other alternatives.
One of the things I think that, I absolutely agree with Mr. Estaso. I mean, remember, when we had 8 or 9 different community meetings, one of the biggest charge was about 80% of the population of the public that we talked to really wanted classrooms. I think, man, we've vetted this thing out to the nth degree to determine whether or not we can actually build classrooms. I think you can if you want to give portable classrooms. Obviously, I have clear direction. That's not where you want to go.
It's not what that model's about.
Absolutely not. So if we're going to build any, whether it be modular or stick built, we don't have the money in the current bond or in our current dollar value to build classrooms. That's an unfortunate reality today. We just don't. The money's not there. Even in its, this particular format was, you can see, was pretty minimal. Even at, what we were attempting to build. So even at a minimal level, bare minimum level, classroom structures are just too much. It's outside of our capacity for $13 million. So I wanted to eliminate that as an option. I want you to ask questions about that, if you have any questions, and then we're going to go on. I want to discuss, okay, what can we build?
okay.
Any additional questions on this option that JTS presented to us?
I do.
Sure.
First of all, did the press also, besides having the diagram, have the letter?
yes.
Yes.
Okay. Going back to, I think it was 2006, the fact is, I had kind of an enjoyable thing happen to me over the weekend. I was looking at my wall in my front room that I hadn't noticed for a long time, and here's this little plaque I got from the school board, school district, and I wasn't even on the school board at the time. I was in a couple of committees, master planning and also facilities. And we discussed, long before we were at where we're at now, of how we could build a school with classrooms. And several different ways were discussed. Now, I see one of those ways coming back, I won't say to haunt me, but to come up again in this letter. And by the way, it's sort of at a disadvantage and unhappy again, because the letter is dated April 18th, but I find out about it on June 13th.
If you remember what I said, though, let me reiterate, okay? That was when they submitted it, and we've had many, many weeks of discussion, obviously, after that fact, vetting that letter and talking about
But if
what
I could have
can
had
we
the
do.
letter, I could have been like looking at it, figuring it out, instead of in 3 minutes trying to have one ear on this and one eye on here and divided attention. But anyway, here's my question. It says on here, one suggestion, and I'm looking at the second to the last paragraph, is to use the existing campus location, and then they go on and he talks about seesawing around a little bit to keep what we've got now. And my question is, instead of giving up having the school right away, or changing it in to where I know you're going to go next, let's just build everybody a gym, which I think is going to be making a lot of people very unhappy. Why can't we talk about trying to make stick-built classrooms in our same area, like close half the campus at one point, build nice new classrooms, move them over the new ones, then put more new ones where the old ones are. Now, it may be like a teeter-totter and all that, but does this paragraph say that that's within the realm of possibility of meeting our budget and have classrooms instead of just a shelter gym?
Once again, they haven't even assessed that. I don't know why they can even report that, but understand that, if you remember, Mr. Layton, a long time ago, we've explored that as an option, right? When you have to move those kids, where are you going to move them to, and how much is that going to cost? Now, what expense is basically, if we've talked about it, if you'll remember, there was a rat hole, basically, that you were pouring money down when you move kids around into portable structures. So you move half the campus into a portable structure. Where are you going to move them, and how much is that, at what cost is that going to be there? And we explored that as an option. If you remember, it was an extensive amount of money to do that, and it really didn't yield us anything.
But we're not moving dirt then, right? We're not building,
But
getting down into the
But if you
lower
do that, understand, you can, but let me tell you a little bit about that possibility. That possibility, can we do that? Sure, we can look at that, but here's what you risk. Number one is you're going to risk, again, an inordinate amount of more A&E fees. It's a whole new project, whole
We
new
have to
budget.
start over.
Start over from scratch. Not to mention, keep in mind, whether or not this is any value today, I can't tell you. But we do have a letter from CDE and OPSC, the Office of Public School Construction, that itemizes a $14 million due bill to Acton, Agua, Dulce Unified School District. So my point to you, they owe us $14 million. We're on the unfunded list. At some point, hopefully, we'll get funded if a state school construction bond is passed. But I also would not recommend just basically foregoing that dollar value. Because if you start over, build a new project, that application, that money is gone forever, and our eligibility is over with.
Well, I'm willing, of course, to listen to what you're going to suggest next.
Well, in addition to that, let me just tell you something about the DSA aspect of things. If we were to raise all the reloads and put the kids in the parking lot as we did, was the option a few years back, that would have cost $2 million. And we said that's just money that's being thrown away. If we were to phase new construction and leave some of the bungalows, the relocatables, DSA will not accept that because they don't want kids going to the new construction from the non-certified buildings. And they stressed that in numerous letters. The only reason why we were able to design here is because DSA said once you build this, you got to remove all the
Well,
relocatables.
we'll get to that, but let me explain, what that means. I think you have to elaborate on that once we get to the next proposal. So let's exhaust this piece first.
Okay.
Okay?
Did
Do you have any?
No, I'm going to make a long story in 30 seconds to kind of highlight what Larry's talking about. I spent 2 years designing a police facility in the spot where the old police building was, and we designed it, and spent time, spent money, architectural fees, the whole thing. Council came in and said, well, the building will be as tall as City Hall, we can't have that. Okay, so we ended up buying a piece of property across the street and redesigning it, redoing the whole thing. And it took us less time to do all of that than it would take for this whole DSA thing. So our options are limited because of the fact that we are predicated on this draconian DSA approval stuff. And so we did what we did. And remember, the reason we went to not accepting the parking lot transfer and building on the current pad and building down below and going through the process of swapping property was to eliminate that 1 point something to $2 million cost And just to turn around, and now we're being told, well, at least half that money we're gonna have to do in terms of soil. So I mean,
That's partially it. DSA is a big problem. The other problem, I believe, is that, for lack of a better term, we're kind of asking the superintendent to polish a turd and complain that it's not shiny enough. And the turd being the $13 million bond that was, extremely insufficient to start with. And we should have tried to, when we did, for 3 times, and got turned down.
we did try.
That's what I said, we did. We tried 3 times, and I guess we determined that $30 for $100,000 of assessment was the best that we could do, and that passed. We're hoping for the state to match that. Eventually, we had to swallow that pill, that the state's not going to match anything. And even if the funds become available, it's going to be dependent on the economy turning around. That's going to be at least another 7 years, to a point where they're doling out money to match the bonds that have been passed. If that does happen, we're in the line of maybe anywhere between number 4 and 200. We can't determine that. So it's a huge, just fiasco. But initially, this whole thing was flawed. So whatever criticism I dole out tonight, I'm going to keep that in mind, that you're facing an impossibility one way or the other. And I just wanted to express that.
And Matt, I think we know what this is, and I would suggest, let's move on to something, like talking about what the next alternative is.
Yeah, I agree. I just have one more question on
Because
this.
all of those things are true, and they are what they are.
Yeah, it is what it is.
Dr. Woodard, out of curiosity, maybe the architect can help us with this. How much of let's say that the cheapest we could get this done, and let's say that this is the cheapest we could get it done if we had the money. So the total's 15.7, I think it is, somewhere in here. I lost track of it. How much of that 15.7, just out of curiosity, is because we're a public school district, subject to DSA and all the rest of it? In other words, let's say it was a charter.
Oh, boy. I don't know.
I think that
What would you think, Gary?
the agency that's caused us the most costs is LA County because of all the restrictions, catch basins, the grading, all these requirements as far as,
Who's that?
LA County.
But and they definitely have done that, and then there's also additional DSA requirements that charter schools obviously don't have. So yeah, I think collectively, what, 30%, 40%?
At least
30% to
Between LA
40%?
County and
between a charter school versus
Between the
public school.
DSA and the county, and as
Yeah, but
opposed to.
the county we would have to pay for anyway.
Well, there's a lot of districts that don't deal with the county, they deal with local
Because we're
jurisdictions that
unincorporated,
that
so,
don't have,
yeah, they deal with cities only.
reviews. So once you put that, there's,
It's like the city of Palmdale doesn't deal with, that.
But if setting aside the grading issue, let me rephrase Matt's question. Setting aside the cost for the county,
Okay.
and all things being equal, and we had a beautiful piece of property that was ready to build on, percentage-wise, what's the hike from a uniform building code construction versus a DSA Field Act construction project?
probably 25-30%.
25-30%, so there you go.
Because you,
Significant amount.
the public schools have to have the importance factor, which is like building a hospital or a police station or a fire station. It requires that it be.
Yeah, but schools aren't
strengthened.
considered essential service buildings like hospitals and
Yes,
fire
they
stations.
are.
No, they're not essential service,
Well, they're shelters though, so they have
but
to.
they're not essential service. Essential service is time and a half construction, and schools are not time and a half construction.
Actually, they do have the importance factor of the.
I know they do, sir, but it's not to the level
Yeah,
of essential service.
Yeah, you're right.
It's not essential service construction. It's halfway between essential service and uniform building code.
Yeah.
And so if we could just build a charter school, we would be looking at a reduced cost of 25%. And when you're talking millions of dollars, you're talking some pretty change.
Yes.
So, you ready to move on, or
I guess.
it's up to you?
Why don't we build a charter school?
That's your decision, and if that's the direction, I'll be happy to do that.
We don't build it, do we?
Well,
Well, let me,
It's our bond, yeah.
well, let's ask this question. Let's ask the question. And I want to remind the public that we're not committing to anything, we're not blazing trails here. We are simply strategizing, thinking out loud, looking for option, conducting critical thinking, option thinking exercises. That's all we're doing here. So with that in mind, if, could we use a public school bond to support the construction of a charter school? Is that allowed?
I think you may compromise the state match, but I'd have to look at the legality of what the bond language actually says.
I don't matter where, I think it's a legal question.
Yeah, and I think that would be the biggest issue to address, is to whether we could apply the money if we were to build a, because I'm looking at a beautiful, state-of-the-art high school in Santa Clarita that was built in about 10 minutes at a fraction of the cost, while we sit here messing around with lean-tos and all kinds of stuff.
And your point being that they didn't have to deal with DSA.
They did not.
They dealt with City of Santa Clarita, right?
Yeah.
And they have a building that's constructed to the Uniform Building Code standard and not the DSA Field Act.
well,
Or
here's
the
what I'd
law
say.
that instituted the DSA.
I didn't mean to take us off track. I'm trying to brainstorm the broadest possible, and I want to hear the option that you want to present tonight. I'm just trying to get my head around, did we explore it in the most out-of-the-box stuff? I can come back to that later. It's not something you can answer in a meeting, so I can table that question. The only other one, just so we can say we're done with this, is, and I think this was covered by Mr. Layton's question, but they did bring up the same kind of option that Mr. Layton did. And when you answered Mr. Layton, you were also kind of answering this paragraph that said, move the portables to the football field. And in your view, we would spend enough over that process that you crunched the numbers on that and felt like...
We did it 2 years ago. We had a pretty extensive.
I still have the site plans that show the move. It was one option was to move them up to the football field, another one was to move them to this parking lot, another one was to move them here.
So this has been fleshed out?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
We
we've
have
done this.
numerous site plans with cost estimates.